Hi, Bill. How are you doing this week?
I'm good. I'm speaking to you from Netroots Nation in Austin, Texas. The tail end of the Readers-Writers Mixer here in the exhibit hall. I think things are going to clear out. You don't see too much behind me right now. All these exhibits have already cleared out for the day. We're going to head over to hear Howard Dean give the keynote address in about a half hour or so. And earlier today, Howard Dean had a small rally in front of the convention center here. He is on a Register for Change tour, which I believe started in Crawford, Texas, and is heading to, I think, Mississippi and Louisiana, maybe one or more states. And already he did an interview with some of the bloggers here. And I know Chris Bowers at Open Left put up a post basically playing up the rally and talking about this as how exciting it is to see the 50-state strategy that bloggers had always been promoting. It helped fuel Dean to the DNC chair, and now seeing it put into place, it put the love in Chris Bowers' heart, if I'm quoting him directly.
Well, if that scene wouldn't, then I don't know what would. But just for a little backstory, this whole confab is the not predecessor, but the outgrowth of what was YearlyKos, right?
Yes, this is the third annual convention. It's the first year that's being called Netroots Nation. It began as YearlyKos. Gina Cooper had started it. It's a bit of a misperception that Marcos of Daily Kos started it. It was never his idea. It was never a direct Daily Kos project. But it had, I think in its initial inception, sort of a convention for Kos readers primarily, and it so quickly grew beyond that that the organizers felt it made sense to really have this be more representative, reflective of the broader Netroots movement and not have it be perceived as just an outgrowth of Daily Kos. I think it also has a side benefit whereas like last year you saw Bill O'Reilly taking random comments from long Daily Kos threads and trying to smear the entire conference with it. You haven't seen anyone try to play that game this year, now that it's Netroots Nation.
Yeah, well, he was the first 2 years they used the Daily Kos logo for everything, right? And this year
the colors,
but I mean the whole look of it was at least they have the same colors and the same kind of type print that the Daily Kos site had, and this year they're definitely kind of branding it completely different.
Yeah, it's definitely having more of a clear, distinct identity now.
Yeah, I'll just tell a small story about YearlyKos. When I first started over at National Journal Blogometer, I was pushing my boss, who was then Chuck Todd, to get them to pay me to go out and cover it. But from 3 or 4 months out, it didn't look like it was going to be a big deal, and it was still kind of hard to sell, the idea of a bunch of bloggers coming together as something a news organization would spend money to send people to. But then, as the names of people who are going to be there started coming in, the Mark Warners of the world, the Howard Deans, the Pelosi's. Well, it was in Reed's backyard. It was in Vegas. That was pretty easy. But as it became a bigger event and it became such a 2008 kickoff, Chuck eventually regretted the fact that we didn't sign up early to get out there. So I ended up covering it from the Watergate for the hotline. But I do wish I had gotten out there for that first year.
Is there any effort on the right now? Obviously, there are clearly conservative conventions. CPAC is the biggest conservative convention, and my group, Campaign for America's Future, does Take Back America. That's sort of the counterpart to that. Is there ever going to be a conservative blogger counterpart to Netroots Nation?
Actually, there's one going on right now.
Well, I stand corrected then.
And do you know where it is?
Why aren't you there?
And do you know where it is?
I don't.
It's in Austin.
Is that right?
It's very true. I got to go to the two conventions, and my boss, Rob Bluey, is going to the GOP or the Conservative Bloggers Convention down there in Austin. So he's actually he had an 8 o'clock flight out tonight, so he should be taking out a national as we speak.
What's it called?
What's it called? Wow, you're so exposing me as a bad conservative blog movement member.
Well,
look,
is it safe to say that it's not of the
Austin.
size of Netroots Nation yet?
Right. But anyways, they're there, and it wasn't, the planning wasn't as long as was for YearlyKos. I think it was thrown together in the last 6 months or so. But so I don't know what the numbers are. But next week
You'll give it a good rags to riches story when it blows up 5 years from now. It started with just a ragtag bunch of 15 bloggers on the outskirts of Austin.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what building they're in, but I know they're in town there, and I'm sure they're having a good time.
Excellent. So what else is on your mind this week?
Oh, well,
we were going to segue. You had noticed a couple of back and forth among some blogs whether or not blogs suck.
Yes. I
assume many bloggers at Netroots Nation would refute that argument, but what is the blog suck argument?
Oh, well, there's this guy who I've never heard of, David Appel.
Well, he must suck.
Clearly he does. Well, actually, he's also a mainstream journalist.
And he really sucks.
Or at least he writes for them. But anyways, he had a very long blog post, which can definitely be described as a rant. But basically, he's apparently from the Southwest and has been covering water issues for a long time. And he was perturbed by a Matthew Iglesias post in which it was one of these ones where the Atlantic bloggers all do this. They'll say, like, open comment thread, this is a comment thread where the readers, can bring up a topic and I'll address it. So Matt threw it open to the readers and said, bring up a subject that you want me to talk about. And one of them said, well, what do you think about water policy? And so Matt basically said, I don't know a ton about it, but, I read this cool paper on, water trading rights, and I think it's a good read, and, I kind of generally support that idea. So
Iglesias had said openly, I don't know a lot about this.
Right.
Blah, blah, blah.
But here's a good paper I read, and for what it's worth, it sounded right to me. So this guy, David Appel, who's been apparently covering water in the Southwest for many years, took great attentiveness, and I will quote this part. And this casual traveler who has spent his entire life living in apartments on the eastern seaboard actually thinks he has something valuable to say, because a year ago he spent a few days in the Best Western somewhere in the Southwest. With no evident local knowledge whatsoever, even admitting as much, Iglesias nevertheless offers a solution to this enormous complex problem, a solution based purely on some political theory he read some magazine somewhere last year, and which has absolutely no nuanced understanding of the complexity of the true situation on the ground. So then his last paragraph, he goes on, generally talking about how we need editors, etc., and says, so more and more I'm focusing on real writing, detailed reporting for magazines where you can do some real investigation and reporting, and your audience isn't just people reading over their calzone at lunch. I don't want to send up some vapid blogger who tries to say everything and who says nothing whatsoever. I don't want to end up as some vapid blogger who tries to say everything and so who says nothing whatsoever. Life is too short. I'm not really sure what the solution is. And Matt...
And he wrote this on his blog, correct?
Yes, he wrote this on his blog.
Just making sure.
Right. We'll get to Matt's response in a second, but I liked Chris Bowers a lot better at Open Left. Bowers writes, wow, that last paragraph is so extremely elitist. Real writing? Don't want to write for people eating calzone over lunch? Yikes. And then Chris goes on to say that I have a personal stake in this, of course. Before I became a blogger, I spent my entire 20s trying to become an academic. While I struggled to produce a handful of conference papers or publish articles during that decade, in my 4 years as a blogger, I have published 4,400 articles that have received 50 million direct page views, 46,000 incoming links, and over 100 Lexis mentions. Had I stayed an academic, none of this would have been possible, and I would have continued to receive an endless series of rejections from the gatekeepers. So basically, he then goes on to defend the idea of the internet. It doesn't have the same rigid gatekeepers, but it has a more collective wisdom of crowds that rewards the more insightful writing, like Chris. And I disagree. I agree with Chris wholeheartedly. There's lots of crap out there and lots of bad political analysis out there, but Chris does do a lot of great, interesting, thought-provoking work. Not just writing, but more research into numbers on polls and districts and trends. And he's a very valuable read, and I consider myself smarter for reading him every day.
Well, I find all these sorts of discussions, and I've had them in some of my interactions with human beings offline, criticizing blogs in general for whatever, and it's like any other medium. There are some blogs that are good and some blogs that are bad. There's some blogs that are credible and some blogs that lack credibility, and you can choose to read or not read what you want. If you don't like the way Matt Iglesias handles his blog, I don't understand what even this guy's particular complaint is, because it wasn't as if Matt Iglesias was pretending to be more knowledgeable about something than he actually is. He was merely passing along something that he thought was interesting. But, you don't want to be Matt Iglesias, don't be Matt Iglesias. It doesn't mean that you have to dismiss an entire medium, just because, Fear Factor is a crappy TV show doesn't mean everything on TV is bad. There are some good TV shows out there. So I just find the whole argument very, very strange. And to Chris's point, the whole notion of having gatekeepers, of having editors, of having peer review, is that there's some sort of quality control you're going to get from that. That you're not going to get, misinformation or factual inaccuracies or what have you. And I think what's frustrated a lot of people is that even with that quality control, a lot of bad information has gotten out into the world anyway from those mediums. So just because, I like the New York Times in many respects, but I sure see a lot of bad information in the New York Times that needs to be called out and criticized. So I can't trust the New York Times as gospel the way I can't trust the YearlyKos as gospel. I have to look at everything with a critical eye, and that's just the way life is. So Dave Campbell can hopefully figure that out one of these days.
Yeah, I think even more another aspect which I really like about blogs as a medium is kind of exactly the way the water issue came up for Matt. Is that he threw it open for kind of what are you interested in, and the readers identified some issues, and he found one that he found was interesting, and then threw it up there. So somebody who before never didn't have blogs as an option to read could go read in the New York Times, the New Yorker for a long time, and kind of never come across an article about water rights and water scarcity in the Southwest. But because they are reading blogs and they do read Matthew Iglesias, they're introduced to a new issue, and they get a new perspective on it, and it broadens their portfolio of issues that they maybe care about and understand. So I think there's just that other broadening horizons of people being able to relate to information through another medium that they trust more and might incentivize them to learn more about more issues than they would have before.
We agree, Conn. Blogs are awesome.
Blogs are, as H used to say, blogs are awesome.
Speaking of the awesomeness of blogs.
Yes.
I thought the article in the New York Times today, quoting one of the executives at MSNBC, essentially saying it's a matter of when Rachel Maddow will have her own show on MSNBC, I think is partly a triumph of the influence of the blogosphere. I think that's a situation where, someone with Rachel Maddow's background, who would probably have never gotten into TV at all unless there was, and it's sort of a combination, I think, of both blogosphere and the rise of liberal talk radio. Air America has been considered a laughing stock on the right for a long time.
Right, and it still is. I
mean, believe me, there are plenty of things wrong in the boardroom there. There's no doubt about that. But even though they did file for bankruptcy several months back, they are They are still alive and kicking. They are still on the air, and they have successful personalities, including Rachel Maddow. That was an example of Air America finding homegrown talent, and I think fueled by bloggers raving about her repeatedly, sent a signal to MSNBC that there's some talent here worth cultivating, even though she's far from the mold of your average TV pundit right now. And now that she's got a test run as subbing in for Keith Olbermann, she's held Keith Olbermann's ratings over that time. If you're MSNBC, if you look at the ratings on their prime time, basically it's sort of down with Chris Matthews, it spikes up for Keith Olbermann, it drops down again for Dan Abrams. You clearly have people that tune in to Olbermann and leave. And I think it's very evident to me that if you had Maddow back to back with Olbermann, you'd hold that audience. And that's not the way that I think a lot of TV executives have thought. We can't have two liberal shows back to back, but it's at the end it's a business. And I don't think there's a big post on YearlyKos just today, all excited about the prospect of Rachel Maddow being and encouraging folks to write an MSC and get this done. I just don't think this would have happened if there wasn't something outside of the mainstream media that you could show that someone of that perspective, I don't just mean liberal perspective, but just sort of the way she approaches the news that I think is very unique and unlike what you see in a lot of cable TV today. If you didn't have blogs showing support for that, I don't think she ever would have gotten a shot.
Yeah, I have 2 points. One, I don't want to underplay the role the blogs play because they are definitely very popular. But the driving force to create the personality that is Rachel Maddow and give her a big shot at MSNBC is less blogs and more one man, that man being Keith Olbermann. Now that said, Keith Olbermann wouldn't be
I wouldn't discount Keith Olbermann's rise with blogs as well.
Well, you just cut me off. That's exactly what I was about to say.
I apologize.
Is that, Keith Olbermann definitely wouldn't have been as possible and definitely wouldn't have as forceful opinions as he does if he himself weren't, truly a member of the Netroots Nation. He blogs at YearlyKos, he's clearly a reader, he interacts with them, he keeps a diary there. So, Keith Olbermann and Eric America mentioned before, none of them really you can't point to any one of those three and say that's the reason Rachel Maddow is going to have a show on MSNBC. Instead, there is what over the Bush presidency there's developed a formative, left-wing noise machine that acts as a farm system to produce the Rachel Maddows of the world. In the same way that for many years there was a conservative farm system that created the people you love, like the Tuckers and Bill Kristols of the world.
I guess a question for you. Actually, let me tell one Keith Olbermann anecdote before I ask you the question. It's like I actually mentioned it in my book. Because Keith Olbermann only started blogging at YearlyKos recently after he became very popular.
Right.
But before that, you go back to 2004, he was the only prime-time anchor to take the issue of election irregularities in Ohio seriously. After John Kerry said, I'm throwing in the towel, and the rest of the media said, if John Kerry's not going to fight this, I'm not going to do stories on it. And Olbermann obviously took a lot of risk of being considered a conspiracy theorist and chasing down crazy rumors and whatnot. But there was so much support in the blogosphere for that it generated a whole host of email to MSNBC, positive email, thanking him for doing those stories. I mean, he would have probably been smacked down by his bosses for being, a tinfoil hat guy. If he wasn't able to show very quickly, there's an audience out there for this and no one else is serving it. And then the ratings in that month, proved the point that the emails were not just a blip, that there actually was a spike in the ratings that he had for owning that story. That gave Keith his protection for keeping his job. After that, it also helped him rise to become the most popular person at the network, ratings-wise. So I think that all feeds into what is now, I think, helping Rachel Maddow out. But I guess my question to you is that conservative farm team still at play? Are there rising stars in the conservative blogosphere that are getting better gigs, or is there an ossified generation of conservative talkers that's not letting new talent bubble up?
No, I mean, I wish I was at a book party right now for Ross and Ryan's new book, Grand New Party. Ross was a National Review intern, and Ryan was worked for David Brooks as a research assistant. So those are two rising stars.
I'm sorry, I'm keeping you from the party.
Oh, that's okay. My wife doesn't get off till 7 o'clock, so I probably wouldn't have made it anyways. But no, there's definitely no rush to sign a huge contract. So there's definitely some very very popular people at the top, and it is definitely a more mature market. So when you have a more mature market, it's definitely harder to rise up in it. Whereas the burgeoning market for heavily opinionated left-wing stuff is in its infancy. So there's more chance for new entrants to make a name for themselves. But I think what you see with, and I know this is a concern at MSNBC, especially with Tim Russert recently dying, is do they want to take that step, and do they want to become the Fox News of the left? And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Well, I don't think they do, and you see there's evidence of that. Morning Joe, which is essentially, even if Joe Scarborough is slightly heretical for the conservative movement, he's still a conservative and still a pretty right-leaning show. But I think it's hard to go right-left back to back. Not Dan Abrams is not right, but they used to have Scarborough Country, in prime time. Right now you have sort of more non-ideological shows in Hardball and The Verdict, sandwiching around Keith Olbermann, and that's not quite gelling as a lineup. Whereas you could go conservative in the morning for MSNBC and go liberal in the evening, and that could still potentially work for you. And it's not having MSNBC be the liberal network. Even if they have maybe.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to go that route. I think they're going to go the route of trying to create as much of a brand firewall as they can between MSNBC News proper and the MSNBC News cable outlet. I think that because they're not going to. They don't want to lose the real estate that they have with Meet the Press, and if they kind of went more full Olbermann Maddow, they would lose out to the Snuffleupaguses of the world.
Well, it presumes that people are going to look at that and then look at Meet the Press in a different way, and I don't think that's necessarily a given. I think it would very much depend on who your Meet the Press, your new Meet the Press host is going to be, and I would be surprised if they went in a explicitly liberal route for that. Maybe if they wanted to do something innovative, they could do a Maddow Scarborough double team for Meet the Press. But I don't think they're going to go one ideological way or another for that show.
Well, no, they're definitely going to try to keep it as straight as possible. I just think that's a challenge.
Fair enough. So you want to move on to? We want to talk Obama and Iraq and McCain and Afghanistan. Is that right? Yeah. We wanted to do a little bit because I didn't see this reported at all in much of the cable nets, but Barack Obama has scrubbed his description of the surge and has completely changed his description of what is going on in Iraq. The story was first caught by the New York Daily News, but then it got fully flung across the conservative blogosphere. The New York Daily News reports that the surge is not working, Obama's old plan stated, citing a lack of Iraqi political cooperation, but crediting Sunni sheiks, not U.S. military muscle, for quelling violence. Obama's campaign posted a new Iraq plan Sunday night, which cites an improved security situation paid for with blood of U.S. troops since the surge began in February 2007. It praises GI's hard work, improved counterinsurgency tactics, and enormous sacrifice. Gateway Pundit also has both the old and new versions of the Iraq page on Obama's site, and he highlights the previous page said, the goal of the Iraq surge was to create space for Iraq's political leaders and an agreement to end Iraq's civil war. And now, voila, poof, no more mention of civil war. Then Jim Garrity over at the Campaign Stop
has quotes from a whole bunch of past Obama speeches talking about how sending more troops to Afghanistan would not work. And Garrity then comments, a candidate who has, the audacity to claim that he was always said the surge would result in an improvement in the security situation and a reduction of violence, when he said the exact opposite many times, thinks that A, voters are gullible, and B, the media have the attention span of over-caffeinated ferret. So those are two of the, harsher posts on it. Jake Tapper, not a member of the conservative message machine.
Member of the mainstream media.
Member of ABC News, the mainstream media. Notes that, picks up on the story, credits the New York Daily News with breaking it. But then also follows up with another page that Obama has changed. An older campaign fact sheet from fall 2007 states more unequivocally that the surge is not working, since the Iraqi government has not stepped up. Obama also maintained that reduced violence in Anbar province is the result of cooperation between American forces and Sunni tribes, which started more than 18 months ago. And Tapper comments, Obama's only mention of Anbar on his page today was to say that the future, both American and Iraq, will be more secure when the terrorist in Anbar is taken out of the Iraqi army and the criminals in Baghdad fear Iraqi police, not the coalition forces. So this is again the flip-flop meme that the conservative blogosphere is pushing, and that was the same day that the New York cover story came out. So the New Yorker totally crushed that news cycle, and so that little change in whether or not the surge was working on Obama's website was, for now, a forgotten issue. But we'll see if it comes up later.
So are conservatives mad at other conservatives for having pushed these Muslim memes and anti-American memes so strong, and now it has circled around and bit them in the ass, and they couldn't push the Iraq flip-flop meme instead?
So, as we can see, the New Yorker cover was a big gain for Obama.
Well, I have to say, in reading the differences between the Iraq page today and before, I think the notion of it being a scrubbing strikes me as overblown. There isn't really there's no flip-flop in position.
Well, that's not true.
And there's not a real flip-flop in an assessment of the surge. There's an updating. There's a reflection of
there's a what?
The levels of violence being down now, but the consistent part of the page before the page now remains the same. He had always said that the ultimate goal of the surge is supposed to be to get this political reconciliation, and that hasn't happened. That's a consistent bottom line in the pages before and now, and there's even a nuanced explanation of the surge. The current page doesn't say the surge is working. It has some explanation about what things are affecting the levels of violence going down that are unrelated to the surge, while giving some credit to increased troop levels, but knowing that there are other factors at play. So it just strikes me as an intelligent thing to do, to simply recognize that Iraq's a fluid situation, facts change, you update your website accordingly, and if there's a need to change your position on it, explain it as so, but he didn't see a need to change his position on it, and so he didn't. So I don't really quite see what the big deal is.
Yeah, well, the big deal is that he was against the surge and said sending more troops in would not improve the security situation, and he said the surge wasn't working. Now he says the surge is working, and
but that's not what it says. It does not say the surge is working.
He definitely says the situation is improving. So,
and he talks about how what factors are at play for that. He credits a number of factors that are unrelated to the surge, but gives some hat tip to troop levels as well.
We'll link.
But I think his bottom line is still that the political reconciliation isn't there, and that's what the surge was supposed to do. So again, I don't see what the big deal is.
Well, it'd be nice if Obama was open enough to post the old and new versions on his site, but he's not. So people can go to. We'll provide the Gateway Pundit link, and he has saved both the old and new versions, and people can decide what the gist of the old and new statements is. and how much lordly twisting was involved in the evolution of Obama's position. But speaking of evolutions on positions,
something I would argue has gotten even less attention. I don't even think Jake Tapper's mentioned this one, if I'm correct. I could be wrong.
I don't know. I know the Washington Post has.
A number of blogs, particularly Talking Points Memo and Obsidian Wings, have really driven hard the change in McCain's position on Afghanistan for a very long time. Obama said we need to reduce troop levels in Iraq, so in part to help beef up troop levels in Afghanistan so that situation doesn't spin out of control. And now, this past week, after resisting that position, McCain embraced it and agreed that we do need to increase troop levels in Afghanistan. And, again, he could certainly make the case that, hey, facts on the ground change, the situation in Afghanistan has gotten worse. But I don't think he's really acknowledged that this is a change in his position, and there's been almost no media coverage. This has been Talking Points Memo's argument. Here is McCain moving towards Obama's position in a very direct way. And here's a guy saying that I am so much better in national security, my judgment is so much better in national security. How can you take this neophyte Obama and put him in as commander-in-chief and actually shift his position towards Obama? I think it's a pretty big news story, but I've only read it on a handful of blogs.
I have a number of responses. First of all, it's not a change in priorities for McCain at all. And this is a difference between Obama and McCain. Is Obama thinks Iraq is not important to American security, and that Afghanistan is primary importance, and so more resources should go to Afghanistan. And McCain has the opposite position.
I'm quite sure it's how Obama would characterize it as not important. I think he would say that the strategy is not helping national security.
Well, we can both agree that their priorities are flip-flopped. One says Iraq's more important, the other says Afghanistan's more important. Right?
Sure.
Okay. So McCain, in a town hall meeting to New Mexico, said, thanks to the success of the surge, these forces are becoming available. Our commanders in Afghanistan must get them. So basically he's saying, before we didn't have enough new troops in Afghanistan, but now that the surge has worked, those troops are being freed up, and we can send more troops there. But unfortunately, McCain, a half hour later, on the campaign bus, kind of signaled opposite, that he might not send new troops to Afghanistan and that he would just call on NATO to supply more troops. So McCain's position continues to evolve there. So I don't know today if he wants to send more troops to Afghanistan or not. It probably depends on when you ask him.
And I think Think Progress was the one that was hitting him on that.
Right.
Pushing the notion that he's not even giving a straight, coherent answer. He keeps moving back and forth what he actually means by this. I'm resisting the temptation to say he's being confused. I know that could be considered a sensitive buzzword.
He's not confused. He just has wants to talk to the generals, get the facts on the ground, and let that inform his position, like other candidates. But the two other points.
Is he going to be traveling to Afghanistan again then?
What?
Is he going to be traveling to Afghanistan again then? Because apparently that's the only way one can get the facts on the ground.
No, but he has a hotline.
Unless, of course, it's a campaign rally in that case, then you shouldn't go.
He has a hotline to betray us, so he's got that one for him. But the two other points I would make is, number one, is Obama, Hillsway has all these great...
Can you hold on one second?
I can.
I want to run over
Yeah.
forward, Matt.
It's okay. That's right. There's a gentleman here working the room who has to push a large thing over my power cord.
Okay.
That is just about completed.
Okay.
All right.
We're good.
Back where we were.
Okay. So Hillsway has all these great quotes from Obama, outlining how he's always had Afghanistan as priority number one. And, what struck me is that Obama keeps saying that he wants to take the additional troops from Iraq that he wants to draw down and send them to Afghanistan, which is great, except for the fact that his budget also calls to save $90 billion a year by bringing the troops home. And you can't save $90 billion a year by bringing troops home if you're going to turn them around and send them to Afghanistan. Because they don't fight Afghanistan for free.
Be remotely close to a majority of those troops to go to Afghanistan.
Well, we'll see how well he's able to fit to his timeline of everyone home in 16 months, which of course is flexible. We know now.
Well, it always was. He's been saying that during the primaries.
My other point is from Juan Cole, which has some, as he puts it in his post, some friendly criticism.
Are you citing Juan Cole?
Juan Cole. I've always read Juan Cole.
Is that right?
I have.
I recall in earlier blogging heads, but you expressed not being that much of a fan of Juan Cole.
That's true. Well, I don't know if I would call him a fan. I disagree with him a lot. But I also disagree with Chris Bowers a lot, but I read him often.
Continue, sir.
I did digress. So Juan says, the major critique I have is that Obama is talking about intensifying the search and destroy missions being carried out by U.S. troops in the Pushtun areas of southern Afghanistan. As we've learned from Vietnam, search and destroy missions only alienate the local population and drive it into the arms of the insurgency. Cole then goes on to talk about how the cost of guerrilla struggles is high, how there's been a lot more suicide bombings in Iraq. And he continues, I don't know whether Senator Obama really wants to try to military occupy Afghanistan, even more than is now being attempted. I wish he would talk to some old Russian officers who were there in the 1980s. Of course, it may be that this announced strategy is has political purposes of having something to say when McCain accuses him of surrendering in Iraq. If the Afghanistan gambit is sincere, I don't think it's good geostrategy. Afghanistan is far more unwinnable even than Iraq. If playing it up is politics, then it is dangerous politics. Presidents can become captive of their own record and end up having to commit to things because they made strong representations about them to the public. And then Juan finishes, we should stand up Karzai's army and air force and give him some billions to bribe the tribal chiefs and let him apply a carrot and stick himself. We need to get out of there. Al-Qaeda was always bin Laden's hype. He wanted to get us on the ground there so that Mujahideen could bleed us the way they did the Soviets. It is a trap. So we'll see whether or not, it always struck me as odd, Obama's language about, sending more resources to Afghanistan. And, there are elements of the party that, I thought would always be for that. But, there still is the underlying sentiment that Cole articulates that, we don't want another Vietnam. And Afghanistan was Russia's Vietnam and could very well be ours, which, of course, was bin Laden's belief all along, was that he could bog us down in Afghanistan. So, Juan Cole's voiced some concerns.
It resonates with you? You were concerned about it becoming another Vietnam?
No, I didn't say I did. I said there are larger elements within the Democratic base that are far more sympathetic to that answer than I am. And we'll see as the Obama presidency develops whether that doubt grows or is quenched.
Well, I don't mean to dismiss Juan Cole at all because he's a voice that I respect. As far as to what extent here he is representing a large segment